Guys, today we got another comparison between two of the top plated training shoes on the market. Saucony Endorphin Speed 3 here, one of the OGs in the plated training shoe category. Has a big rocker and some PEBA foam in the midsole. Boston 12 is a newer shoe to this plated training segment. Came out a few months ago and I just picked it up. I've been using it as my long run shoe of choice over the past few weeks. Both of these are really solid options. Boston 12 is on the firmer side of the spectrum. Saucony Endorphin Speed 3 is on the softer and bouncier side of the spectrum. So in this video, I'm gonna dive into all of the details on these shoes, including midsole, upper, fit, and outsole and durability. I'll end by letting you know who these are gonna be best for. All right, guys, before we get into it today, if you haven't checked out the Running Shoe Matcher tool yet, go to runningshoematcher.com. This is a really cool tool I built that matches you with the best shoe for you based on your goals and preferences. So you can go in there, answer 5 questions about what type of shoe you're looking for, whether you want a daily trainer, a tempo shoe, or a race day shoe, whether you like your shoes soft or firm, and we will match you with the best shoe for you. Could be the Boston 12 or the Endorphin Speed 3. So it's live right now and it's free. You can check it out at runningshoematcher.com, and I'll put a link in the description below. Quick overview of the Boston 12 and Saucony Endorphin Speed 3. So Boston 12 is part of Adidas's Adizero lineup of shoes. That's their fastest lineup. It includes a lot of their racing shoes like the Adios Pro 3 and the Takumi Sen, and this is the high mileage training option in that lineup. It has a dual foam construction with the glass fiber EnergyRods here, and it does have the Continental outsole rubber on the bottom of the shoe. Now Boston 12 has a heel stack of 37, a forefoot stack of 31 for a 6mm drop. And it's coming in at 9.5 ounces, which is on the heavier side for this plated training shoe segment. Now, Saucony Endorphin Speed 3 is part of that Endorphin series from Saucony, which is characterized by these big rockers. You can see it as that canoe bottom for that rolling along sensation when you run. The other shoes in this lineup include the Endorphin Pro, Endorphin Elite, and Endorphin Shift. Shift is a daily trainer, while those other two are marathon racers. This one comes in with a 36mm heel stack, 28mm forefoot for an 8mm drop, so a touch higher drop than the Boston 12. Now, a key difference between these two is weight. The Saucony Endorphin Speed 3 comes in at 8.1 ounces for that US men's 9 sample size, so a full ounce lighter than the Boston 12. All right, guys, now let's dive into the midsoles between these two. So the Boston 12 uses a dual midsole construction. You can see here there's 2 different colors of foam. The bottom color of foam here, this white one, this layer is the Light Strike 2.0. It's an EVA based foam, so a standard training foam. Whereas this top foam here, you can see this nice thick stack of it in the forefoot. This is Light Strike Pro, which is a supercritical TPEE. Now, in addition to those 2 layers of foam, you'll see that there are glass fiber EnergyRods in the midsole here. So this Adidas Boston 12 midsole is gonna have a bit of a firmer feel to it than the Saucony Endorphin Speed 3. If you look at me bending the shoe, there is not a lot of flexion throughout the back 2/3 of the shoe, but if you look at the front third, this forefoot is pretty flexible, so it does allow for a nice feeling of control up here in the front. Now, the midsole of the Saucony Endorphin Speed 3 is 100% PEBA. It's Saucony's Power Run PB compound. Same exact foam we're gonna find in the Saucony Endorphin Pro 3, which is the marathon racing shoe. And this one does have a much softer feel. If we look up close at it, you can see there's these little beads in the foam here, almost like that Adidas Boost foam. You can see all these beads throughout it, but this is PEBA, has a much higher energy return than a training foam like that Boost. Now, this one has some more miles on it than the Boston 12, so it might be broken in a little bit more, but you can see that due to the plastic plate in here, it is a little bit more flexible than the Boston 12. That Boston 12, this guy here, has the glass fiber EnergyRods, whereas the Saucony Endorphin Speed 3 has this winged nylon plate. It is going to be a little bit more flexible, less harsh feeling underfoot than the Boston 12. So as we get out there on the run, key difference between these two, Boston 12 is going to be firmer. Saucony Endorphin Speed 3 is going to be a little bit bouncier. Now, due to the 1 ounce difference in weight, it is pretty noticeable on foot. Boston 12 does feel like much more of a planted, heavy duty training shoe, whereas the Speed 3 does feel like a little bit of a lighter weight shoe, not necessarily like a racer, but a little bit less serious, a little bit easier to run in. If you like that feeling of a rocker and making it easy to roll along, you will appreciate the speed roll of the Saucony Saucony Endorphin Speed 3 here. However, what I really like about the Boston 12 is that when I'm trying to run fast and putting some serious power down into the ground, it does feel like I have some more control over the feeling of the shoe, and like I'm driving the shoe versus the shoe doing the work of running for me. That's probably the biggest difference between these two. Saucony Endorphin Speed 3 is a shoe that makes it easy for you to run, whereas the Boston 12 feels more like a training companion. So when you put this on, you are in charge of the shoe. You are the one doing the work of running. Now the Light Strike Pro in the forefoot here, it only really comes alive at marathon pace or faster. That isn't the case for the Saucony here with this Power Run PB. This is very bouncy no matter the speed you're going, which makes it not the best option if you want to have a controlled, slow, and relaxed ride. This, due to the rocker platform as well, does really put you up on your toes, and it forces you to run with a certain kind of form where you're going to be wanting to lean forward and keeping that turnover up. Now the Boston 12 doesn't necessarily punish you like the Speed 3 does for wanting to run relaxed, but it isn't the most friendly at slower paces either, just due to the fact of it being a bit of a firmer platform. It doesn't feel as exciting or alive when you're running slower than marathon pace when you're running easy miles in it. For me, I wouldn't choose to do the bulk of daily training in a shoe like the Boston 12. I'd much rather go for a cushion shoe like the New Balance 1080 V13 or even the Hoka Mach 5, something that's a little bit lighter on foot and something without plate or rods, because the plate and rods and the Boston 12 really do respond best when you're trying to run fast. In terms of stability, both of these shoes have some inherent elements to them that make them mildly stable. So in the Boston 12, there's this chunkier EVA heel out in the back, which is wider to allow for some planted landings, whereas in the Saucony Endorphin Speed 3, you can see this nylon plate here. This is going to add some more structure to hold the midfoot in place, so it's not wobbling around when you land in the back of this softer foam. It's really interesting because the Boston 12 is more planted when you land because of that firmer heel. But because of those lockdown issues that we'll get to in the upper section, it's not the most stable shoe for cornering. Saucony Endorphin Speed 3 does feel more nimble and a little bit more natural on the foot for turning and cornering. Saucony Endorphin Speed 3 probably will get along a little bit better for most runners, especially if you don't like firmer foam. And I know that's a key issue with a lot of these stability shoes out there. They tend to be pretty firm. So if you already have a lot of firm shoes in your stability collection and want to go with a neutral, fast shoe that potentially could add a little bit of support, I would give the Saucony Endorphin Speed 3 a try, knowing that this is not a stability shoe by any means, but it does have these little wings on the side which add a little bit of support through the midfoot. And compared to the Speed 2, they did widen up this base a little bit. So if you did run in the Speed 2, found it a little bit like running on a pinhead, you might want to give the Speed 3 a chance, as it is more stable than the previous version. Now, if we head up to the upper, you'll see the Saucony Endorphin Speed 3 has a nice breathable upper here with some holes. Boston 12 has a breathable upper as well, but this one is a little bit more constricting and constraining when it's on the foot. The Saucony Endorphin Speed 3, it feels like there's a touch more stretch in the upper, which allows you to tighten down the laces. Also, the laces are going to be a lot softer in the Saucony Endorphin Speed 3, but I felt like I could crank down the laces and get a really solid lockdown on the Saucony Endorphin Speed 3, whereas the Boston 12, the lockdown is one of the key issues that I have with this shoe. I've had to stop and retie it at least twice on every single run that I've taken out with it. I do really enjoy running in the shoe, but it is one of those issues where I'm not sure if I'm ever going to completely get it 100% right, no matter if I put 400 miles on the shoe. Saucony Endorphin Speed 3, on the other hand, the heel lockdown is excellent. There is a lot more structure out in the back of this platform here. You can see this hard plastic piece versus the Boston 12. Very unstructured back here. You can see I can almost completely collapse the heel. I can also just really fold it in like a sandwich, whereas the Saucony Endorphin Speed 3 does have this heel cup out in the back. Now the forefoot of these is where the Saucony Endorphin Speed 3 is going to be a little bit narrower. So if you do have a wider foot, Boston 12 is going to fit you better. Although the midfoot of this is tighter, the forefoot of the Saucony Endorphin Speed 3 is really tight up there in the front, and it has pinched in even my feet, which are pretty standard size. So overall, the upper on the Saucony Endorphin Speed 3 is a little bit better than the Boston 12. That's the key area that I really hope they improve for the Boston 13. If they put a more standard training upper on this, and I understand why they didn't want to do that, just due to this already being a pretty heavy shoe for the category, but if they did lighten up the midsole foam a little bit, they could add some more padding and structure to the upper, which would benefit it greatly. Saucony Endorphin Speed 3, on the other hand, has a really great upper. It's just if they widen this forefoot a touch, it would be a little bit more accommodating for most runners out there. In terms of the outsole, there is no contest here. Adidas takes the cake for the best outsole between these. If we look at the rear of the platform, you can see the Saucony Endorphin Speed 3 has the strategically placed rubber, which I've worn through at about 300 miles, whereas the Boston 12 has these really thick pieces. You could call this strategically placed because there is a gap in the middle, but the application of the rubber itself is much more comprehensive. There's no cutouts in the slab here. Same thing with the forefoot. Saucony Endorphin Speed 3 has some major gaps out here, whereas the Boston 12 has a pretty thick, full piece. Now the Boston 12 is using that Continental rubber, which is known as one of the grippiest, most resistant to wet, slick roads out there. So this is going to be a really good option for winter, icy and wet roads. Saucony Endorphin Speed 3 has Saucony's XT900 rubber. It is okay. I haven't had any issues with it slipping, but the Boston 12 is just going to be much better all around. And both pairs of the Saucony Speed 3 that I've owned, I have worn through this back rubber here in about 300 miles, but that's pretty standard for me. So you could expect standard durability out of the Saucony Endorphin Speed 3, and I project a little bit above average durability for the Boston 12. In terms of who these shoes are best for, I would recommend the Boston 12 if you like more of a firm, controlled ride, and the Saucony Endorphin Speed 3 if you're looking for a fun, bouncy, a little bit softer ride. Now the Boston 12 does ride more like a trainer, whereas the Saucony Endorphin Speed 3 feels a little bit more like a racing shoe due to the weight differences. But overall, I have to give it to the Boston 12 as a better workout shoe. Now, if you're a faster runner targeting a sub 3-hour marathon, I think you could get more benefit from the Boston 12 than the Saucony Endorphin Speed 3, mainly because this Light Strike Pro really does feel best when you activate it at those faster paces and you're putting more force into the shoe. The Saucony Endorphin Speed 3 with the softer Power Run PB here that we see in the midsole, it kind of collapses for me. It bottoms out a little bit when I try to go fast, when I try to run sub 6-minute pace. It's not my favorite for 5K pace or doing any fast repeats. I would much rather do that in the Boston 12, where this Light Strike Pro with a little bit of that firmer feeling just makes me feel more supported and more able to put my full force down into the bottom of the shoe. Now the Saucony Endorphin Speed 3, because of that little bit softer feel, is a really solid option for long runs. So if you're primarily looking for a long run shoe for those efforts where you're only going to be going as fast as marathon pace, maybe not even any faster than that, then I would give the Speed 3 a shot. However, if you want more of a do-it-all type of shoe that could do marathon pace, that could do long runs, that can also do faster work, then I would give it to the Boston 12. There's not a huge price difference between these two. Saucony Endorphin Speed 3 is $170, Boston 12 is $160. So I would choose based on those factors that I outlined above. If you like firm and fast, Boston 12. If you want soft and fun, go with the Saucony Endorphin Speed 3. All right, guys, there you have it. That is my comparison between the Boston 12 and Speed 3. Thank you for watching. Thank you for liking and subscribing, and I'll see you tomorrow.